Greetings, MelVee family. A warm welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to tune in to this series, My Journey with God. And in this series, we seek to explore how, through our lives, God is a golden cord that links up everything and leads us, and that we are never alone. And that when we share our stories, we give glory to God and we gain victory. Today, I've got a very dynamic, powerful young man who's got a life-changing story. This one is for the glory, it's for the heavens. It's a big story to tell, and I'm very happy to have him here. I've known him for many years. I've seen him grow, and I've seen him flourish. Grant.
Yes, Uncle.
Warm welcome, man.
Thanks for having me, man. I highly appreciate it.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
It's good to have you here, man.
Oh, likewise. I haven't seen you for a while, so this is actually great as well.
I blame it on COVID and
yeah, other things. Factors, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
And how have you been doing, man?
Yeah, so it's been a great journey. I think the recent developments on my side have been recently got married. That's been pretty cool.
Congratulations, man.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I really do. And then outside of that, do a bit of lecturing at a nice institution, and I've also run a business of mine for about 7 years now.
Wow.
So still learning the process. I think one of the things that around business as a whole is you realize that whole journey process is one that you have to take on and understand the process and allow things to actually work when they're supposed to. Not a moment sooner. So that's for me, yeah.
So let's rewind the tape way back to the time when you realized, I'm alive. I've been born.
Man.
Tell us about your childhood, growing up. What are some of the experiences you feel God was with me there? If God had not been with me, because really this episode is to look at your life and how God has led you thus far, and how you think He's leading you into the future.
Yeah. It all has to start off with a story around my mom. I think when it comes down to my childhood as a whole, both my parents definitely very active, but my mom around putting me with people that were always a whole lot older than me. Okay. And allowing me to actually speak to them on a regular basis. Okay. And one of the things that allowed me to pick up was that one day a pastor comes through to our home, and as usual, we always have people by our home and so forth. Okay. And I'm not too sure what I did, but he looked at me and said, "You have a lot of faith," right? And this is maybe when I'm about 5 or 7. You've got a lot of faith. Take that seriously. And I think that for me has been one thing that I've always looked at very seriously. Because regardless of what position I'm in, whether it's something I'm envisioning or something that I'm undergoing of a struggle of some sort, I've always had a thing of, I know how this is going to end. I just have to believe strong enough that it will. Wow. And usually it happens the way I envision it to. If it doesn't, there's a big lesson I learned from it. And I'm happy to obviously move forward.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this was a pastor speaking to you?
That was a pastor speaking to me. Yeah.
Is he still alive?
I'm not too sure. You know when you can be so young that you even forget the person, all you remember is just the story.
The moment.
Yes. That moment was pivotal. And maybe just to add 2 more. That moment, what it birthed going forward was the value that I have right now in prayer. So because I learned how to pray at that age, there was a point in time where I remember the car that we were in, my parents were dropping people off and it was raining. So we got into some ditch of some sort. And as soon as we got into that ditch, the car engine got wet.
Stalled.
Yes, so it basically stalled. Now, I've been taught that as long as you pray, something has to happen.
Wow.
So at a young age of about 6 or 7, round about that same age, I then tell everybody, Dad, Mom, everybody, let's pray. And the car should work, right? Now, some might call it naivety. I understand. But in my thing, it's full blown. If God hears us, something has to happen.
Yes.
And I pray about it. My dad then switches the car on. And as a result, the car starts.
Wow.
Pivotal moment as well.
Wow.
So those 2 things for me have been definitely the cornerstone of just around my whole walk with God, that I just need to have faith in Him, and somehow, someway, things are going to work out the way they should.
Wow, man, you should be a pastor by now. Given this,
my mom keeps calling me that.
You should be a pastor, man. And talk to me about more people. Perhaps I'm more interested in your parents. It looks like they played a very pivotal role, like you said. Yes. What are some of the values and the principles they have instilled in you? Prayer, I think it's one of them.
Oh, for sure. Prayer, definitely. I think one of the big things was just you come from a community, and a name is everything. That was something that they always instilled in us. It was always a matter of whenever you go out somewhere, you are always representing us.
Wow.
And that for me,
that must have sounded very hectic.
Yes, it still does. It still does. It still does. It doesn't help that I look like my father as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it does. Because essentially, what ends up happening is that wherever you go, you always, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, what's going on with if my parents were to hear about this?
Yes.
How would that represent them? Now, I'm not saying that I did everything perfectly. I am human, full. But there's always a great reminder that you are more than just the person you're in a room. You are always much larger than that. You represent the community. So that's something that they definitely instilled. Work ethic, that's one thing that they also don't take lightly. I was listening to a podcast today, I think it was one that you actually did as well, that just talked about time management.
Yes.
And I resonated with all of the things that you had to put across. That if you're not somebody that sits down and says, I need to manage my time, I need to put in hard work into whatever it is that I want to envision, nothing ever comes to fruition. So those three, definitely prayer, you belong to a community, and hard work.
Now, you were not born alone in this family.
Oh, yes.
So we don't want the other siblings to feel, why didn't you talk about us? How have they impacted your life?
Leadership, I guess, right? Leadership. I've got a younger brother and a younger sister as well. They might not say that they're younger now.
Ah, yes.
Right?
Yeah, they've been around the block for a bit.
Clearly. And with my brother, I think one of the things that I've learned from him has been camaraderie.
Okay.
Because we're only like 2 years apart.
All right.
Most of the stuff that I would have faced, he'd have definitely been around, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So
I think I'm going to get him here one day.
Please do. Please do.
I saw he does podcasts as well.
Yes.
So I think I'm going to get him here and get the other side of the story.
Please do. Please do. I want to hear it. So that's been him. He taught me a lot about camaraderie. Him and I have been also in a position where for a large part of our lives we're best friends. And I think now when I look back and I hear other people's stories and so forth, you realize that, wait a second, this is not something that just happens. We can have the same blood, but that relationship, that's something that needs obviously work on and so forth. So that I learned from him. From my sister, there's one thing I've learned from her, is just how interacting with people is very essential. I think she's basically put across that one must be involved in people's lives, and when you're not involved, typically you start to almost strain that relationship, or things begin to obviously start to draw apart. So yeah, I think whenever I speak of her, there's always a soft spot inside me around just protection, but also at the same time, the value of actually making sure you're intentional with your relationships.
So let's talk about your career and your work. Obviously, you went to school. You've chosen a pathway that you're in. How has your career and your work life been impacted by your faith, the things that you were taught, and that faith that you were told, you've got a lot of it?
Yes.
How did it impact your career and your work?
Man, I think it's understanding that whatever moment you're currently in is not the end of the story, that there's still more to be written. And this is when things are at their high and when things are at their low. Just having that sense of consistency that today is today, tomorrow will be different. I will also say, based also on my own journey, and this is when my parents would probably look at me and go, it's been a flow. So I come out of O levels back in Zim, went to Lower Gweru.
Okay.
Right. Was there for Form 3, Form 4. So that was 2004.
So you are a Logos boy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I hope the facilities have changed. But yeah, I think that was also another pivotal point in my life as well. If there's anything that Zim taught me, was just being disciplined is an essential of life.
Right.
I take that now also very seriously as well.
Yeah. That was a mission school, so definitely you were instilled with a lot of spiritual emphasis, and also the mission schools by nature, they are quite very open to labor and to working and to earning your living.
Yes.
And so I assume that really was quite powerful. Now, how has that upbringing at a mission school impacted on your choices and the career you have taken now? Or you think God has just taken you on a detour? It's totally different.
I think he's taken me on a detour. I think what has been interwoven from my missionary time was empathy.
Okay.
And I'll tell you where that comes from. So my dad had a very the job that he was at for quite some time allowed myself, my brother, and sister to go to very nice schools. And these were schools where you come in and you're typically, out of maybe 20 individuals, only 3 or 4 of you are people of color. So you the whole multicultural aspect and so forth. But there was a lack of empathy on my side if I had people around me that didn't represent what I would see in those specific schools. My dad gets into a position where the job that he's at, he ends up losing. Right. I also saw a lot of strength in that period from both him and my mom. But long story cut short, we're in Botswana at this point in time, and my parents are like, "You guys still need to go to school, so we need to send you to Zim." And because of the Pula and Zim dollar exchange rate, they're like, "This is actually favorable for us."
Okay.
And that's how Lower Gweru comes into play. Now I was supposed to go to Anderson originally. I did their entrance test that didn't work out too well.
Oh really?
Yeah. Okay. My brother and sister went there, but then I, on the other hand, was not privileged to do that. But I think there was a message in that as well, because Anderson, in this case, at least last I checked, that they were typically, if you're going to adventure school, that was typically like, top of the top.
Yes, Anderson is actually a renowned place. Yes.
Oh yes. So when I didn't, the principal at that point in time said, "Look, go down to Logos." And which case I went. Now Logos is an interesting school because at that point in time, maybe it's changed now, we as the students would actually do a lot of the manual work. And that was to make sure the school fees drop. So the people that we are surrounded by were also able to come to school. So there's a lot of things that I learned around that, just that whole being empathetic, because now you're in a position where everyone's in class from completely different backgrounds. So I think that's one thing that has translated throughout my whole career. Empathy. Seeing life through another person's eyes.
Yes.
And trying to relate to them on that specific basis as well.
And that's really a big Christian principle, really. Being empathetic to others and helping them.
Yes.
When Jesus says, "You saw me hungry, I was in prison, I was sick,
yes,
and you came and helped me. I was hungry, you fed me." So that whole empathetic thing comes in. So since those days, how has God led you, and when have you seen God leading you in your career path up to this point?
And I think the big thing for me, well, I've said a lot of big things, but around speaking, I think that for me is when that began to tap in.
All right.
So having grown up in all those institutions, or being part and parcel of the church that I've been part of, you would get roles and so forth. Like on a Sabbath, you'll be told things like facilitate this class, read this in front of the church and so forth. So I think from a public speaking perspective, that has been something that has taken me to different places and spaces. All right. So and I know we're going through segments here and there, but based off of that, I was able to sit down and say, I can stand up in front of people and articulate a story. And for some strange reason, people look at me and say, "We understand what you're saying, and we're on the same wavelength. We feel you emotionally, and we understand you logically, and we want to do something as a result." So when you talk about the earlier comment around being a pastor and so forth, I'm like, where have I heard this before? So it's really helped me. And I remember once when I was doing sales as a financial advisor, we were all in a group and we were all given a task to present something on a book. So I articulated what I thought should be said around somebody who was going around a sales journey and trying to get to a point where they weren't good at sales to the point of getting good at sales. So when I went up front and I presented, the whole class, or everyone that's inside that specific meeting, goes quiet. You can see everyone's paying full attention. It feels like the emotion of the room actually changes. And when I sat down, someone was like, "You've got something. You should take that seriously."
Wow.
So that definitely changed. Started going to a place called Toastmasters International to basically take that talent and say, how do we make this thing an actual thing? Because I think we're given talents, but we need to develop skills.
All right.
So that transition for me was very important. How do you take a story and actually articulate it in such a way that you can actually compel people to do something? And that also took me places. And as soon as that was then established, I was able to write my first book, which has now become 2 more as a result. And as a result of that, I've also been able to create a publishing business. And we've been able to at least publish for 20 books. 20 books outside of that of mine as well. So I've been pretty privileged off of that. But based on the upbringing that I've had, where I've been able to have the privilege of being in front of people consistently, that has birthed the possibility of actually doing something much larger than that. Yeah.
That's quite awesome. So you've got 3 books on your
Yes.
on your lap.
Yes.
Man.
3 books on my lap. 3 books on my lap.
You've done more than I've done.
In terms of writing a book, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think for me, I've written more scripts than I've published, but that's quite commendable.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And perhaps I would give you the privilege to forage through my scripts and see what can be published.
I'm sure there's so much gold.
And let's talk about challenges. Everyone has them. And these are the things that really make us tougher. They create the character and the personality that we have. What are some of the challenges you faced, and how has your faith and your journey with God helped you to navigate through them?
Man, I think the big word for me around that has been authenticity. I think for a bit of so part of Form 3, Form 4, I felt during that time I was pretty authentic to myself. Okay. And what do I mean by authentic? Because that means different things to different people. I feel like when God has more or less a script for us, in the sense that when I was born, there's a specific purpose that he had. I think Form 3, Form 4, I was living that out very well. I think once I left that, I then started to almost give away my authenticity for being attached to people. So I'd want to be a people pleaser for the sake of, now I'm attached to individuals, I'm in the comfort of individuals, as opposed to sitting down and saying, God actually scripted something for me or has a purpose for me. I should be living that. So I think some of the failures that I've had was just not necessarily sticking to that authenticity going forward. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, obviously, God has helped you with specific approaches of how you deal with those challenges. What are some of the practical things that you do when a problem lands into your space? How does it affect your relationship with God, and how do you handle it with God? I want you to be very practical on this one.
Very practical. Man, I'll start off with how it first looked. I think when I let go of the faith element, where I believe that there's more to this, and this is how this should end, I think already there I've set myself up for failure. So if, let's say I face a problem, and I'm trying to think of one. So I remember one of the things that I did was at the financial institution that I was selling products at, I bought a vending machine. And one of the things that my mom and dad in this case have been very proactive about was just have a job, definitely, pay lots of focus to it. But there has to be something on the side that you take your talents and you basically start building additional skill sets out of. So I bought this machine and started to sell products out of it. Now, there's an excitement that one gets when you realize that I did something of service and now people are compensating me for it. Inner excitement. That excitement drove me to the point where I said, I'm going to leave my job, which was paying for my bills, and I'm going to obviously just focus on this thing, this vending machine. Not the best of decisions from a logical perspective, and that caused a lot of ruin for me financially.
Okay.
So looking back, that was a terrible, terrible spot to be in. From a faith perspective, and just now dealing with it practically, it's coming down and saying that, I'm not in a position. Firstly, it's acknowledging that I'm not in the position that I want to be in.
All right.
And I think that's very important for everyone to do. You've got to sit down and acknowledge. And then you've got to ask yourself, where do I actually want to be? And in my case, it was, I want to be in a position where I'm not necessarily selling financial instruments anymore. I want to be in my mind, a proper career. No shade on that institution. A proper career, and I want to run a business as well. And as a result, now those in the future, I'm not there right now. What can I do today that will allow me just to get one step closer towards that? And that's where things like Toastmasters and writing my first book came about. It actually came from a place of, I need to change my surroundings and where I want to go in life. So I'm going to write a book to alternate or to give myself an alternative going forward. So when I look back at that specific journey, just around failure, number one, you've got to acknowledge where you are. Number two, you've got to get an awareness of where is it that I actually want to go. And you have to articulate this. If you don't actually write down and say, this is where I want to go, I don't know what happens to our minds. It's like the next day, all of a sudden, we your mind starts fluttering and doing other things that it's not necessarily supposed to. It's got to be channeled, and writing allows that to happen. I'm sure with your scripts, when you write scripts and so forth, it channels the conversation to a certain area.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And I feel it does the same thing with your mind as well. So one, acknowledge. Two, have an awareness. And then as soon as you have your awareness, sit down and say, what do I need to do today? To allow myself to get to a point where I now start realizing those successes in the future.
Yeah. So I want us to just take a step back again, and because I want us to help our viewers understand how God has led you thus far. And so if we go back to the early experiences, to the publisher, the speaker, the Toastmaster, what has been your journey like with God in all these years? How would you summarize it if anyone was to ask you?
The first word that comes to play is eventful.
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 Okay.
Eventful. Definitely eventful. I think when it comes down to just speaking as a whole, one of the things that I think as speakers we're plagued with is, what do we speak about? And I think God gives you exactly what you should speak about, how you should articulate it, and so forth. So I think when I look at it from God and just the journey throughout, God gives the messages. And it's just, we're blessed with the fact that we're a vessel that God allows us to actually say, let me now go and take that message elsewhere. As long as I've kept that, the journey in and of itself has been great. When I've deterred from that, it has not necessarily turned out the way I wanted to. So that's been my journey around. I think God gives a message, and I'm a messenger through that, and I know my position through that as well.
And how does God give you clarity to say this is what you should do? Or is it a trial and error thing? How does he speak to you?
Very, very good question. Very good question. I think he speaks to us through, number one, sometimes the communities that we're in. And I'm talking about outside of him speaking to me directly. So I'll probably grow up and someone will say that you seem to say really wise things. Or someone will say, to your words, you should become a pastor. My mom still calls me Mfundisi till this day. She has not let go of it, right?
Okay.
And I think
I know why. Go ahead.
I feel that, and I want to hear why as well. And I feel like when you hear those comments come through, it's people saying that there's where you are right now versus where you could be. This is where you could be, but we also acknowledge that you only have the raw material right now.
Yes.
But this is the picture that we paint.
Yeah.
In another circle, that might be different. Someone might say, you can become a professional speaker. And what I feel one needs to do is sit down and say, what is the link between every single one of these? And I feel that's where God now goes, you've got a gift of communication.
There you go.
Yeah. You've got a gift of communication, and I think and this gift of communication you can now utilize for 1, 2, 3. And if you look at the gift of communication, there's so many ways you can utilize it. Am I going to become someone that sells products? Am I going to be someone that writes books? That is endless. And I feel like that's when we sit down with God again and say, okay, I feel this is what people are telling me. God, what do you have planned for me? God will say, well, communication. Okay, great. Lord, there's so many ways to communicate. What do you think would be best for me? And God is diligent enough to tell you, this is what you should do going forward.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I know why Mom says that. I will leave here to tell you, but if I was to speak to you, it's exactly what happened on Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah saw something high and lifted up on that throne. He saw God. In the year Uzziah died. And remember, Uzziah was a guy who invented a lot of things for Israel, was a great military leader, great innovator. He created weapons for Jerusalem to defend itself. But then his biggest mistake was to think that he can become also the high priest and go into the temple. And he was hit by leprosy. And he died a leper outside the city. And so when he died, Isaiah says, I saw the Lord. So spiritual vision restored. But then he had a question, who shall we send? In fact, before the question, who shall we send, he says, when I saw God, I felt destroyed. Wretched man that I am. I live among people with unclean lips and all of that. But then the tipping moment, and this is my view, an angel brings a coal with the tongs from the altar. And look at where it places it. The Bible says he touched his tongue.
Yeah.
That's the gift of communication.
Mm.
Yeah. So if God has given you that, then the next question which was asked was, who shall we send? And as I said, here I am, send me, Lord. And I guess the journey you have gone through is, and I think I want to understand a little bit more about that. So let me play the role of mom. Why have you not been, or how are you becoming the pastor in your life and helping other people?
Man. So I'll be very honest and say that I understand where people are coming from. And
No, we're not talking about people. We're talking about you.
Nice. I deflected there. Hey.
I saw it. This could be the aha moment, actually, for you. And I know this is what this program does. But let's talk a little bit about your reflections and perhaps your spiritual journey. Some of the things that you do. I'd really like to know, what are some of the things that you do to keep your faith bright and there? Because, life has a way of dimming and just blowing our light off.
Yeah.
How do you keep the light burning?
And that for me, it's around two main activities. One, it's daily reading, putting at least a verse inside my mind and contemplating that verse during the day. Then reading books around spiritual matter as well. That has really enabled me. There's one that has been a favorite of mine this year. And then the second thing that I really do, I try my best to be intentional about it, is journaling. That's also been a recent thing as well. Being able to sit down and articulate what's happened during the day, my thoughts, how I reacted towards things. But my journaling is not just about me writing to myself. It's also me saying, God, this is what's going on, and this is what's going on. So I take that time to sit down, confess, and say, now that I'm seeing my thoughts here, Lord, what's the next step forward? And I feel like that has allowed a sense of growth with God, but also practical in the sense that God says, this and this stop, this and this continue, and the next day you basically come back a person that's revived. The times I have not done that, I've seen how if I face a challenge, you almost revert to the training that you would have had before that. So I'll give an example. So for instance, if I decide that I want to get onto a health journey, right? And then I get the likes of someone like Wayne to put my food together and so forth, right? Or as soon as I start eating that food, that might be in a position where my mental state and everything around me is very healthy. But then comes a day where a business deal goes bad, or I get into some altercation with my wife, and now I'm stressed. And if I have not learned to take my system that was there prior to a point where I elevated to a point where I only eat that healthy food, chances I'm going to go to McDonald's, no offense to them, all right, or any other institution where I'm going to get food that does not serve me well. And I feel when I do not journal, spend time with God in that manner, if I face trouble, I go back to a system that otherwise was not serving me to begin with. That's been my take around that.
So what I hear you saying is, don't wait for trouble.
No.
To create a mindset. I also hear you saying, know yourself.
Yeah.
And know what you can tolerate and what you cannot tolerate. And I'm going to flip the script a little bit now, with your permission.
That smile says it all. Yeah, let's hear it.
You've just recently got married, you said.
Yes.
Then I want you to maybe give us your reflections and your advice. If you were to talk to Wayne, or to Ryan, or to some other young person or young girl out there about your experience of getting into this institution, what are some of the advice you'd give them to do or not to do?
Okay, first thing.
You see how we can quickly turn into an uncle?
Like this. First thing I would say, right, is don't do it. Don't do it if your prime principle is that of, I want to, one, be in a position, because I know growing up, one of the things that they talked about, and allow me to just say this word as well, was that sex is meant for marriage. If you're now in a position where you want to get married simply for that, wrong institution.
Okay.
I think you will definitely meet a lot of heartache. If you're in a position where it's anything that is selfish, self-centered, and you want to get into a relationship, long-term relationship, I think that you're only setting yourself up for failure.
Okay.
And I know I've only been with this person for like 1.5 years, but I've already picked up that whatever selfish motive I had prior, and luckily we did a lot of work around that through a couple of books that we read, also seeing a marital psychologist as well. We're able to sit down and actually figure out what tools do we need going forward. So one of the things that we do now, on Wednesday nights, we read a book that has a bunch of questions, a book by a gentleman called John Gottman, right? And he basically puts across, if you want a good marriage, this is what you need to work with.
Okay.
Right? So principles of those I've been able to utilize. Now, where am I going with this? One, you've got to sit down with yourself and say, there's no selfish desire that I have. Number two, love is not enough. And allow me to validate that. Love is a very good foundation, but you must be able to express that going forward. It has to feel like a civil duty. So when I look at my wife, there are days I wake up and she might say something to me and I'll say, today I don't feel like actually loving you.
Okay.
But there's a civil duty that I have. When I spoke to your parents, when I spoke to God about this, when I looked in your eyes in front of a whole church and I gave my vows, it was more than just love. It was me saying, I'm going to act on everything that I'm saying to you. And I feel like that for me has been able to guide me to a certain extent. So looking at anybody young, I would say whatever selfish reason you have, let that go. That will only cause you a lot of heartache. Number two, love is great. Good starting point. And there was a friend of me that actually told me that, why are you marrying her? And I was like, because I love her. And it's like, better recheck that. And that's where that came from. It's good foundation, but it has to be more than that. It has to be like almost a civil duty to say, I'm here night and day and I'm going to work through this thing. Then there's an element of us where I'd also say, make sure you do a lot of reading and see somebody who's qualified around marriage and so forth as well, around just the coaching that it's going to take as well. Because one of the things that I've picked up just around, being with someone is our parents and just the families that we come from. They play such a big role going forward. And what's weird is that you think, no, I'm different. I'm different from my family. Until you start picking up certain habits or you start doing things and then you hear, your dad does that.
Wow.
And I think, there's no way. I've been different for, what do you mean? There's no way. Or I look at her and I say, your mom and your dad does that. But you're thinking that when I married you, I married you.
This person.
No, you marry so much more than just the individual that's in front of you. And I think that's the other thing I would sit down with and say, make sure when you sit down with this person, you also assess their family and say, what family am I actually getting myself into? And really articulate to yourself, is this something that I want? The person that you're with might be amazing. But if that family is not
dysfunctional,
that
dysfunction does rub.
And I'm not saying I come from a perfect family either. There are definitely some dysfunctional things as well. But if I'm not able to even recognize it, going forward into that marriage, I will bring it. It's a guarantee. That baggage almost sits on my shoulders and says, here it is.
Yeah.
So that's what I would sit down with. I would say, make sure that you look at that thing holistically. Don't go in for selfish reasons. Love is great, good starting point, but make sure that you're in a position that you actually empower yourself going forward, that you realize this is a civil duty. I vowed in front of you and in front of God, and words are powerful. And then just make sure you're also educating yourself consistently when you've started and during the journey as well. And whatever it took for you to get her from a dating perspective, make sure that those things don't stop within the actual marriage itself. So my wife still has 2 dates. One was July the 4th, and that specific date would have been dating for 8 years, right? Married only for 1.5. She still remembers that. So that dating has not stopped. It has to continue. Friday nights, we sit down together and we say, what do we want to do together? So things like that come into play. But yeah, that's what I would say. And hey, man, pray about it, hey? Because being with somebody else also teaches you about yourself. And there's some things about ourselves that we only figure out that, this is something I love about myself, but this is also something I don't like. It looks like I don't really like when someone tells me or criticizes me about something. Why? Where does that come from? let's deal with that.
Yeah. We're on the
Said a
flip
lot.
Yes. Quite a lot. Quite a lot. We are on the flipped script, so I'm still going to flip another one.
Okay.
What has been God's role, or your role of your faith in that space, getting into marriage?
There's I know you'll definitely school me on this one as well. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about how men ought to treat the women, or rather the lady in their life, the wife, as the church.
Ephesians 5.
Yeah, I've seen that play out. You know, regardless of whether today I decide that I want to, listen to what God has to say or not, God's love is still towards me. And when I turn around and say, Lord, I'm sorry, God goes, okay, we're back. So in my mind, when I look at it from the point of view of my wife, there are some things that I'll disagree about, there's some things that I will agree about, but there has to be a level of consistency. And that consistency is that we are going to work towards making this, and I'll always be here. I'm not going to turn away and so forth. I will always be here. And that for me is strong.
Yes.
Very, very, very strong.
It's actually the verse I think it's Ephesians 5. It's a powerful marriage text. Husbands, love your wives.
Yes.
Even as Christ loved the church.
There we go.
And gave his life for it. Now, when you compare what Christ did for the church, then you know you have a big order. God must help you on that one.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. He can only.
Powerful. Now, since we are back on the scriptural reference, what scripture really defines your journey with God? What is almost like your motto, your rallying cry, as it were? What scripture really has carried you in your life?
Man, and I'll quote a gentleman here. That's like asking what's my favorite song, or favorite music.
Yeah.
Right. Personally, there's so many. So many. I'm trying to think of just one specific one. There's a book that I've been reading recently, and it's in Psalms. And once again, I'm sure you'll correct me, or rather lead me in the right direction. And it talks about how, as the deer panteth for water, so my soul pants for you. That for me has been a very strong cornerstone, especially this year, because it speaks to quite a lot of things. Firstly, when you listen to the verse, it basically says that this specific deer is panting for a brook, not just any body of water. And one of the things I've realized about the Bible is that it's very intentional in its wording. It's not. We're not looking at a sea. We're not looking at a lake. We're not looking at a waterfall. We're looking specifically at a brook. And questions in my mind are why. Number one. Number two. This deer has come to a point, and depending which scripture you read, some say heart, some say deer.
Yes.
But this has come to a point where it sat down and said, you know what, I'm thirsty. I need to go out and actually get something. And I feel from a human nature perspective, how this has been very strong for me, is that all of us are seeking something.
Yeah.
Every single one of us are seeking something. And God is great enough to say, you've got will, go and fill that hole. But once you're ready, you realize that where you needed to fill that hole was only something that I could have done.
Yes.
And that for me has also been a pivotal point, because now I sit down and say, when I'm chasing this, am I chasing it because I wanted to feel something inside me? And if I am, then I've got to realize that that's going to be very temporary.
Yeah.
The only thing that can fill that is just my relationship with God and His love, and that's it. So that for me has been a very big thing around my faith, that as a human being, I am always searching for something. My question is now, am I filling that void that I have with that of Christ, or am I in a position that I'm trying to substitute with other things, hoping for the same exact pleasure?
Yeah. It sounds like one day you're going to get to a point like Solomon, the wisest man, who says, vanity of vanities.
Yeah.
Let's hear the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and give glory to Him.
Yeah.
And I think the verse you were quoting is Psalms 42, verse 1. As a deer or as a hart panteth for the water brooks, so my soul panteth after Thee. or I long after God. And you're quite right. Human beings have this deep-seated space in our souls that desires something bigger, something better. And when we don't find it in God, we replace it with idols. And that's why there's a commandment against idols.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we do search for a higher calling, because the way we were wired is such that I'm sure if I'm to use the allegory of space, there's a space in the heart that's so small that only a big God can fit in.
Well said. Yes. Well said.
Yeah. Let's maybe talk a little bit about your aspirations going forward. If God was to lead you into the ideas you have, where do you want him to lead you to?
I think I've got a calling when it comes to business. So I think full-time entrepreneurship, definitely. I think God has really called my life in that specific direction. So, and I actually have it. I actually have it written out. I could read it.
That would be awesome, man. Thank you for that.
Could read it. So because words are so powerful, one of the things that I've made sure that I do is write what they call a letter that the person who passes on one day sits down and says, this is what I've accomplished and this is where I'm at.
Okay.
So you hear quite a bit of that, and it basically just articulates what it is that I'd obviously want to have accomplished and so forth. I'm just bringing it out right now. Something I advocate for everyone to do.
All right.
It's called My Life Plan. So from an aspiration perspective, this is and it says the following: in every generation, we get that one person we believe everyone should meet, that person that everyone ought to interact with and exchange energies with. To many, including us, that person was Grant. Grant solely believed in his potential and challenged himself daily to achieve it, from writing best-selling books, owning and running net multi-billion profiting businesses, eating healthy, cooking healthy, and thus being healthy. He's also one of those most sought after and highly paid speakers of his day. That was Grant, ever ambitious and ever driven to have become more. At the core of this ambition was built the foundation of wanting to fulfill the life that God had envisioned for him. Very important bit there. Despite his plethora of achievements, many would think that he would be stuck up and parade himself prideful, but instead he loved everyone he met. He loved to figure out their dreams and would then fire them up to achieve it. He's also a family man, a man of one wife. We all know how he deeply admired, loved, protected, knew, and remained faithful to his wife, Anna. As we lay this man to rest, I know he would all want us to hear these words from him to you. We honor the dream by doing the work. Yeah, so that's me and my ambitions.
Wow. Wow. You've even written your eulogy as you've
Yes. Now the whole world knows.
You know, that's a reality that many people don't want to accept, that we were, go to your birthday in the year you were born. Where were you before that?
Sure. Yeah. Darkness.
You were non-existent, man. You were not there.
Yeah.
But God knew you before. And so the reality is that you've witnessed some people who have been in your life going.
Yeah.
You've buried them. There's this total, absolute absence of those people because they are gone.
Yeah.
As we say it. And yet many of us don't want to accept the fact that one day is one day.
Yeah.
I'm going to be missing from this world. And this world must continue without me. The world doesn't revolve around me. I am only an element. So you've just owed me in that statement you've written.
Yeah.
And you've just read it for yourself. I think on that day, I don't even want anyone to speak it. I'll just say, here is him speaking to himself about his God.
No.
Wonderful, man. But let's nail it down to perhaps some initiatives you feel, not even initiatives. I'm looking at your, we could say initiatives. I think you said you want to do entrepreneurship. But what about around the gift God has given you? Any aspirations?
I think around the gift that God has given me, and if I had to articulate it, I'd sit down and say perhaps two things. I think God has given me the gift around communication and definitely leadership as well.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure which order came first, but I do know that this is something that He has given me, and perhaps communication falls right on top, because as soon as you're a good communicator, natural leadership almost, I feel, falls part and parcel of that. So through communication, the fact that we've been able to publish the amount of books that we have, the fact that I've been able to speak on certain platforms, and also the fact that I've been able to publish that of my own books, I feel like I am living that as is. The way forward is just how do I expand that? So I reach more people so that more people tell their stories, and those people get to share their stories with the individuals that they're from as well. I think that for me is the big one. So initiative-wise, the company that I run is called the Golden Goose Institute, and that's where we publish these people's stories. I just want that to grow as fast as possible and as big as possible, so that a lot more people obviously get to tell their stories.
Yeah. The golden geese, I love that concept.
Yes.
It must lay eggs.
It must.
And those eggs must hatch.
Yes.
And become other geese.
Yes.
That's powerful, man. And I honestly would think that having shared what God has done for you up to this moment, He has bigger and better plans. And by that I mean, look at how, and perhaps this is just speaking into your life before you give me your closing remarks for the viewers out there. Matthew 25, verse 21 and 23 are exactly the same verses. 1, verse 21 is said to the guy who had 5 talents. 23 is said to the guy who had 2 talents. They got the same commendation and reward. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful, la la la. But the 3 words, well done. Hard work you were talking about. Good, meaning you're distinguishing yourself. And by the way, good is the same word God used when He evaluated His own works.
Yes.
So there were a bit of creatives around these guys. In fact, they took 5 and made 10. So that took a lot of creativity and hard work.
Yeah.
So the good part of God saying well done and good comes from creation. Doing stuff and checking and making sure, this is good. And being happy. Faithful is the criteria with which we should measure our success.
That's powerful.
I'm pausing for effect.
Yeah.
Faithfulness is how we should measure our success. Success for me is being able to do exactly what God asked you to do. And if you can accomplish that, you're successful. The rest, He says, I'll add. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. And by righteousness, remember, it's about doing the right things according to the word of God. And so He says, when you do right according to my instruction, you are being faithful. And when you're being faithful, you will succeed. It's a given. When you if you put water on a stove that's on, it's going to boil. When you become faithful on anything you do, you will succeed. It's guaranteed. So failure is not an option. We just pick up lessons from there.
Oh, yes.
And continue to refine. So I would like you to perhaps share anything maybe that we have not discussed, that we have not shared, where you feel God has been leading you. Anything?
Man, I think perhaps one area is just holistic living. I feel to some extent, whilst being somebody who, and I don't want to say the word spiritual, but if you follow a certain type of, I want to become a Christian, and you really work hard at that, the reason that we're meant to be Christians is not for the sole purpose of, I'm here to flatter those who are also Christians. The reason we're meant to be Christians is to be able to sit down and say, the life that I live is that which Christ has called me to, and that is meant to almost be a light to somebody else that says, yo, Uncle Mulusi, it looks like when things go this way, you seem to always be steadfast in your ways. How do you do that? And be able to then glorify God because of it. So there's supposed to be an outreaching of whatever we do. And that means that excellence then is not just a matter of the relationship that we have with God, but it's also the excellence in the things that we're supposed to be doing. So back to that faithful that you're talking about. And I don't know if it's talked about a lot. I feel like it's only been in recent years that it's actually come about. We have to be individuals that are Christ-like, not just in church, but in the rest of our lives as well. That excellence must seep into those areas as well. Yeah. And I feel like that's not something that is really honed on. There was an incident I remember, and now I'm going to story mode, but I'll be back just now, where there was a university that I went to, and when it was time to write tests, if it was on a Friday night, someone would come and say, "Sir, it's a Sabbath for me, so I'm not going to be able to write on Friday night or Saturday morning. What I can do is Saturday evening, I can come and obviously write this test." And one incident I remember, a lecturer said that, "But you're not even doing well. What do you need the rest for?" And that says a lot. That says that this person is saying you want to come with certain procedures and you're telling me about the methodology, but your life is not speaking to that. It's not speaking to the organization around, I'm supposed to do this by this time, so by this time I can honor this. And that for me spoke a lot, because it says that, if you're not excellent in just everything you put your hand to do, don't expect people to take what Christ has done for you seriously just based off of that. So I think that looking at people and saying that your Christianity does not just speak on the relationship that you have with God, it speaks on how I also interact with everything around me. That for me is something I feel we need to be honing in on a lot.
Holistic, you called it holistic
living.
That's a big one. The man who's planted in the Lord must flourish in all his areas. Planted by the rivers, and you must flourish even in the dry season, in the difficult time. People must see. How can people contact you to learn more about what you do and your journey with God?
I feel like such a celebrity here being asked. If people want to contact me, they can get me on social media at Senzani on Instagram. Okay. I've been told I need to be very serious and proactive on that. So Senzani on Instagram or Senzani on TikTok. That's where they'll be able to find me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, man. This has been quite a fruitful discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate the platform and I appreciate the time.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, friends, for taking time to listen to this riveting story. I told you, this is a life worth to celebrate. Not in the idea you think celebrities are, but this one is a life worth celebrating, a life where God is in the theater of transforming lives. Thank you. Remember to like, to share, to subscribe, and if you have a comment, just drop it below. Maybe it's a question. Just drop it below. We'll be very happy to interact with you. God bless you, and all the best.